When I was a kid, there was one section of the Hagadah that was so boring and so endless. At least it seemed endless at the time. And that's the section of the Hagadah that begins with the words, Tsei ulamad, go out and learn. It's the quote from Parshas Kisavo of the Torah describing the bringing of the Bikurim, the first fruits, and the recitation of Arami Oved Avi. Arami Oved Avi is the paragraph that was said by the farmer when he brought the new fruits to the Beis HaMikdash, to the temple. And he recounted the history of the Jewish people from their exodus to his day of bringing the first fruits. So now why we say Arame Oved Avi, that I can understand. Because Arame Oved Avi, it's not just the story of the exile, but it's an accent on gratitude. And gratitude is an essential component of the Seder experience and our relationship with Hashem. I got that. We need to say Arame Oved Avi. But then, there is this ridiculously long exposition of every word of this passage. Arame Oved Avi vayered Mitzrayma, vayagar sham bimsei ma'at. Our forefather Jacob went down to Egypt, and he lived there, vayagar sham bimsei ma'at, few in number. And now there's an exposition. It says vayagar sham, so we learn it was only vayagar, it was only to visit. Melamed shelo yared lehishtakea. He didn't go to stay permanently. Then we look at the next phrase, bimsei ma'at, and we explain that. Vayihi sham legoy, and we explain that. We go for dozens of lines through these few sentences in a massive exegetical exercise. Why is that? Well, what this is medrash, midrash, interpretation, rabbinic interpretation. For what we have is the static text of the Torah Shebechsav, of the written text. That's the paragraph of Arame Oved Avi. And then the rabbis amplified it by looking at every line and reading between those lines. Because the Torah is a divine document with many layers to it. So we take those layers and we parse them. And we find that every word and every letter has meaning. So I understand the significance of the relationship between the written Torah and the oral Torah. But why does it have to be here in the Haggadah? Why is it so important that we spend so much time working out all the details of meaning of these verses? What's that all about? So perhaps there are two levels of explanation. The first, I heard the name of Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik. And that is that Midrash is the crux of the oral Torah. You see, the written Torah is static. It doesn't develop. But the oral tradition, that it changes and it develops. And there is a certain continuity of generations that continues to expand in the tradition. See, because the rabbis had special tools in their toolbox, rabbinic tools, different modes of looking at the text handed down to them from Moshe Rabbeinu. And in every generation, the great scholars of that generation look at the text and they try to see, using their various tools, they examine it to try to figure out what is the added layer of meaning. And sometimes that will change from one generation to the next in the times of the Mishnah or the times of the Talmud. That process, that's called Torah Shebaal Peh. That's the oral Torah. Well, the oral Torah, that's handed over from generation to generation. That's very much what the Seder is all about. At the Seder we say, V'higadah lebincha, we tell our children. We get our children around and we tell them the story of our history. But the story is not a written log. It's something that we tell over. V'higadah, we got to say it from parents to children, to grandchildren, because it's about passing the tradition from one generation to the next. If it's true on the level of story, for the Jewish story, it's all the more so true in terms of the tradition of Torah. Because it's not just about handing over a book, here, read this. It's the connection of the generations through the tradition of understanding, the tradition of interpretation. That's the Torah Shebaal Peh. That's part of what we are handing over to our children and to future generations every year at the Seder. That's why it's so important.